Hi guys, I'm Kristen, and this is Kristen is Fully Booked. Today we're going to be discussing the book Tigana by Canadian author Guy Gavriel Kay. I'm going to do a bit of a non-spoiler review, but mostly focusing on answering the question of whether or not you should read this book. It is on a lot of lists of best standalone fantasy ever, but it can also be a divisive book, with some people really loving it and others not so much. So I thought I would do my style of a review, which is less about a critical analysis of this book and more about finding the right reader for this book. Some people can think of picking up Guy Gavriel Kay or Tigana in general as a very intimidating book to pick up. And while I don't think that there's anything necessarily intimidating about this book, I do think going into it with the right expectations will help a reader to better enjoy this book or just not pick it up at all. I'll start off by talking a little bit about the synopsis and the setting. So we are in a Renaissance Italian setting called the Peninsula of the Palm, which is Kay's version of the Boot of Italy. 20 years earlier, the Palm was slowly conquered by two separate and opposing sorcerers from different lands. One of our sorcerers, Brandon of Egrith, lost a son in a battle against a particular state, and he then completely decimates the army. He destroys this city, and more significantly, he uses magic to erase the memory of this name from everyone else living in the Palm. And this is the state of Tigana. He erases even the ability to hear this name when said by people from Tigana, who are the only people who can still both hear it, say it, and even remember it. And in this book, we are focusing on this grassroots, very small rebellion of people who are trying to take down the conquering sorceress. One thing that I think is important to know going into this book is that it is not necessarily plot or character driven. It is a literary fantasy novel, and it is very, very focused on the themes in which it explores here. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that our plot and character-driven readers are not going to get anything out of this book. This is something that I will talk about when I get to the plot and character sections of this review. But I do think it's important to note that the driving force of everything that's happening here, all of our plot and character moments, are really about fitting into that theme or the various themes that we're exploring. Before I get into talking about the specific themes, there is a little bit of the afterword that I would like to read that helps kind of explain what Kay was attempting to do with this book. Tigana is in good part a novel about memory, the necessity of it in cultural terms, and the dangers that come when it is too intense. The world today offers more than enough examples of both pitfalls, ignorance of history and its lessons, and the refusals to let the past be the past. He then goes on to mention his various influences for the thematic content of this book, whether those are specific moments or events in history or plays that explored similar themes. One of the ones that hit closest to home for me personally is a mention of the separatist movement in Canada, which is something that was going on or was a big topic when I was growing up. In Quebec, the often bitter struggle between separatists and those who wish to remain a province of Canada finds a battleground in language. Tigana was an attempt to use magic to explore these themes, erasing a people from the record of history by stripping them of their name. As Kay mentions, we really go into this idea of memory, of history, of holding on to history, of having that importance of how it makes or shapes who you are and where you are from. But also we go into the pitfalls of history and memory, of not knowing when to let go of a particular grudge of an event that happened. Where is the line of holding on to history and what has happened in the past becomes the problem? And when is it better to let things go and move on? And throughout this book, because we get so many different perspectives, we really do see that everyone has a different idea of when this is the case. A lot of people respond differently to the events of the past, hold on to things in a different way, and react differently. And this takes place not just in various points of view, but in some of the discussions that happen between characters about what is the right thing to do with this rebellion, with moving forward. Pride is also something that is explored, not only in the role that it played in the ability of the Palm to be so easily conquered by these incoming sorcerers, but also in the exploration of what is the best thing to do with this rebellion, and how pride is shaping various people's responses to the events ongoing and in the past. Now, I don't think that this exploration of theme is something that should scare you off. There are lots of plot and character moments that will keep you caught up and invested in this story. Personally, I really struggle to talk about the themes in Kay's novels because I'm someone who feels like I'm just not eloquent or well-spoken enough to really do them justice, but that doesn't mean that you or I can't take in the discussions about theme that are happening and how they impact us personally. The way that Kay writes themes is very approachable, so don't let the fact that this is a thematic-driven book necessarily scare you away unless that's something that you really don't like. But also know that this is a big thing that he does, so if you are a thematic reader, then this is a book that might be worth checking out for you. Now that I've talked about the thematic driving force of this book, I'll talk a little bit about Kay's approach to characters in Tigana. This is a multi-POV novel, and we do have a mix of deep third person as well as third person omniscient perspectives throughout the book. We will often get an introduction to a character, a little bit of a backstory setting up of who this person really is, only for that character to then be a witness to a particular event, and we might not even see that character ever again. This is something that happens somewhat frequently over the course of the book. It is very much so Kay's style and his approach to character writing, but it is something that can be off-putting for some readers. I do see as a common critique for people who are struggling to get into Tigana that they feel like there's an introduction of too many characters and they can't quite figure out who is important or who they should be caring about. I will say that that is a valid critique, but I think that the best way to handle this is just to go with the flow. At a point, fairly early on, it will become clear who the main characters or who the important characters are. Kay uses these side characters who we get a brief perspective of as part of his world building. Rather than just tell you that a certain population group or certain people feel a certain way about something, he shows you. He introduces to you a real person who is a fully formed character, and he shows you a certain outlook on life or how events are affecting a certain group of people through the eyes of a fully realized character. A really interesting character choice that Kay makes is that our main protagonist, the leader of the rebellion, is not a character POV that we get very often. There's only 2 or maybe 3 examples I can think of throughout the book when we actually get the point of view from his eyes. The majority of our main characters, of our perspectives, are people who are surrounding a lesson. This is a really unique choice by an author, and I think one that shows that Kay makes thematic choices in everything that he does. The majority of people that witness big events in history are not necessarily the big movers and shakers. There's only 1 or 2 of those decisive people at play here. There are so many other people who are witnessing significant moments in time or who are contributing, who are generally the lay population, and we are seeing these big movers and shakers through their eyes. If you are a character-driven reader, then you might feel that the connection to these characters is a little bit distant. And in some cases, that's going to be because the characters are very minor, people who just slip onto the page, share their point of view, and slip off again, never to be seen from again, or perhaps to be seen once, maybe twice more. But we do have 2 to 3 main characters here that we generally focus on, people that are close to the rebellion, and one perspective that gives us a look into Brandon of Egrith. Despite the relative distance to these characters, there is a really distinct quality to Kay's writing, where when these big emotional moments happen, you are going to suddenly realize that you care a lot more about what is happening than you realized. It's not necessarily through the connection to the character that you're going to realize you care. It's the way that these moments are set up and written to get the most emotional impact out of the reader. These are not necessarily going to be new favorite characters of all time, but they are very well written characters. One final note here for characters is that in Tigana, you are going to find one of the most well-written or well-rounded villains that you are probably ever going to experience in a book, and that is through the sorcerer Brandon of Egrith. He's the one who has stolen the name of Tigana from the people and who is conquering that half of the palm. We don't get Brandon's perspective, but we do get the perspective of Daenora, who is someone who is in his, I forget the name that they use here, but essentially the harem. So someone that is very close to Brandon. And through this perspective, we see how Brandon's grief of what happened with his son has significantly impacted him and how that is shaping a lot of his decision making. While we tend to think of him as this horrible, evil person who has conquered the land and destroyed the people of Tigana, and we do see him that way through the eyes of many other characters, we also see him as a well-rounded person through the eyes of Daenora. And this storyline is going to give you some of the most conflicted feelings that you will have. It is a very, very heartbreaking storyline, but one that is very beautifully written. Now, the other sorcerer, Alberto, is a little bit more of a mustache twirly villain, but we do get his perspective quite a few times as well, so we can see how the events, the things that the rebellion are doing, how those are impacting him and his control over his half of the palm. But even there, we do get a sense of what his motivations are. So while we are still pretty disgusted and horrified by some of his methods, there is an understanding of why he's making the choices that he is as well. So again, for those character readers, you might not necessarily keep reading because of the characters, but you will care about what is happening in this world through the eyes of these characters. And more significantly, through the moments that these characters experience. The characters are not necessarily going to stay with you, but the moments that these characters experience over the course of this book are moments or scenes that are going to stick with you well after you finish this book. Now let's talk a little bit about the plot and the pacing. This is a rebellion-focused story, but we are getting a pretty well-rounded perspective, not just always in with the rebellion, because we skip over to Dianora's story with Brandon, and I would say that it's not necessarily your typical approach to writing a rebellion. A lot of the groundwork has already been done by Alessan over the past 10 years, so we're really just seeing the final unfolding moments in this last year leading up to a very decisive conflict. This is more of a slower paced book, and it focuses more on quieter moments of impact rather than big dramatic action scenes. There are some action moments, there are some times where you're going to feel tense and stressed about what is happening, and you do always have this sense that you are building towards a final climactic scene or battle. But Kay's ability to write the quiet moments of clarity is where this book shines. And it's here where the thematic content really kind of hits you or clicks, and you're going to feel very emotionally impacted and connected to the book through these quiet scenes that he masterfully writes and sets up, much more so than the times of climax. That being said, there is a bit of a slag in the middle of the book. There are a few different things that are happening at this time that we're focusing on that all kind of contribute to it feeling a little bit slower. We're getting a lot of Dianora's backstory, her history, and what it was like growing up right after the fall of Tigana. There's also a very long, drawn-out sex scene with one character, and we also spend a little bit of time on this somewhat disconnected magical plot line with Baird, who is Alessan's right-hand guy. Common critique here is not only that the middle part slags, but also that this storyline with Baird is a little bit unnecessary, and while it does tie in thematically and it ties in with plot towards the end of the book, I personally think that it is a little bit unnecessary and didn't quite need to be there. Now, if you're worried about a slower paced book having an anticlimactic ending, you shouldn't be. This book has payoff. Without being too spoilery, there are going to be things that are still revealed right up until the very end that are going to rock you and really, really stick with you after you finish this book. The ending here is so perfectly imperfect. There are things that as a reader, you are going to expect to get out of this ending that another author would give to you. But Kay won't, and that's because some of these moments that we expect are not realistic. It is difficult to talk about the tone of the ending without making it seem like it's spoiling the ending, but I will just say that all of Kay's endings are very bittersweet, and that is absolutely the case in Tigana. It is an ending that has impact and that is going to make you feel a lot of things. Now, you can't talk about a Kay book without talking about his approach to sex scenes. A very common critique of this and other books is that his approach to sex scenes is very awkward. I will say that Kay's handling of these scenes is a little bit odd. They are often awkwardly timed. I'm looking at you, Baird. And sometimes we get a lot more information that we need, not necessarily in a graphic way, just that we spend a lot more time there than we truly need. While admittedly awkwardly timed and sometimes cringy, I do think that Kay has a very realistic approach to these scenes. These are moments in time that would just be happening. If anything, I think that they feel a little bit more awkward because Kay doesn't romanticize them. There is no sexual tension or romantic build up to these moments. They just kind of happen. If you want to skim over these scenes while reading this book, you absolutely can do so. You probably won't miss much, although one character has a sort of life epiphany, I guess, just after one of these moments. But I wouldn't avoid reading this book solely because there are some weird sex scenes in it. Now, I usually finish off my reviews with a section of who should read this book and who shouldn't read this book, but admittedly, this was very difficult for me to do so because I generally just really want more people to find, experience, and love Kay as much as I do. So I really tried to approach each section with a realistic expectation of what you're going to get out of plot, character, and theme here. So if there is anything glaringly within those sections that I talked about that really turns you off, then this might not be the right book for you. But I also hope that there are some things that I said throughout those sections that really caught your eye or intrigued you to pick up Tigana. And just going into it, knowing that there are some cons, knowing what to expect out of Tigana is, I think, a better way to go into this book. I also think it's important to note that this is not a book to binge. Tigana is a book to be slowly consumed over time so that the moments when they hit can really sit with you. Definitely though, if you are a thematic reader or a historical fantasy junkie, you should be picking up Tigana. If there's something that's really nagging you about something that I said that you're unsure if that would be right for you, or if it's something that you've heard about Tigana in general, put the question down below. I would love to help clarify whether or not this is the right book for you to pick up. If you had read Tigana, I'd love to hear what you thought about it. If you would agree or disagree with anything in particular that I said, let me know down below. If you just want to let me know that you're still here, that you made it to the end of the video, we'll go with like a palm or a high five emoji for the peninsula of the palm today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps the channel out. I'm very close to 500 subscribers, and I would love to do a Q&A when I hit 500. So if you have questions just for me personally, put them in the comment section down below. Have a great day, everyone. I will see you guys next time. Bye.